Violence has been a major driver of engagement in video games for a long time, arguably since 1962's Space War, and since then the ways and means of enacting this violence have only grown. Stabbing, shooting, cutting, in person or in control of great armies, games give you more ways of killing a man than you can shake a stick at, and that includes hitting them with the stick. But what if you want something a little more chill? There's always been sports, racing and other simulational games, as well as puzzle games, and of course more recently your so-called cozy games like Animal Crossing and Stardew Valley, though even Stardew Valley involves slaying monsters in its mines. Non-violent games are often sequestered into their own genres, the general assumption being that other genres, violent genres, aren't adaptable to non-violent gameplay loops. Take, for example, open-world RPGs. You couldn't have an Elder Scrolls game without violence, right? How would you have all of that adventuring, exploring and questing without bandits to murder and skeletons to smash? 2019's Eastshade answers that by trading in your sword for a paintbrush and sending you off into the world. It's not a true RPG, of course, lacking any kind of stats to build up over the course of the game, but still focuses on many of the same forms of engagement and interactions beside that. Before we talk about Eastshade though, it's worth talking about Leaving Lyndow. Leaving Lyndow is in some ways a playable teaser for Eastshade. It's a short walking sim that takes you through several locations. All of the areas in the game will later feature in Eastshade, and Leaving Lyndow does a good job of quickly establishing the setting. It's certainly not required to enjoy Eastshade, but it is nice when you come across an area from the first game out in the wilderness, and seeing how things have changed since then. It's good to play as a setup to Eastshade, but it's narratively and mechanically distinct, so it's also worth playing in its own right. You play as Clara, a junior research assistant recently accepted into the Guild of Scientific Exploration, on the last days before she sets off on her first expedition. You start out at home, packing the last few items you need before setting off to visit a few places ahead of your voyage. The local tea house to say your final goodbyes to your friends, your uncle's farm to assuage his fears for your safety and play with your infant cousin one last time, and the forest you played in as a child to reminisce. These areas are all beautifully realised and look great in the late afternoon sun that illuminates them. There's a great sense of nostalgia throughout. It does a great job of capturing the feel of taking one last look around a piece of your life before moving on to the next. Finally, you reach the port of Lyndow, ready to set off. Lyndow is under construction at the time. A mudslide destroyed old Lyndow sometime before the game, so now it's being rebuilt under the watchful eye of its cranky architect. By the time you visit it again in Eastshade, the town will be finished, and the architect will have mysteriously disappeared. While the characters are well realised, despite the brief time you spend with them, the actual character models make for one of the major weak points in the game. They're a little off. Large ears, bald heads, all of them covering their lower faces with a mask or bandana, which is a fine choice from a cultural perspective, but it's apparent the choice was made to avoid having to animate the characters' mouths. In a post-mortem about Leaving Lyndow, the developer mentioned that they also thought that these characters were a weak point. The intent was to have them a cross between humans and monkeys, which is certainly a good way of describing what they are, but it's also true that they are kind of ugly to look at, without being designed in an interesting way. Eastshade would switch these out for fully anthropomorphic animal people instead, though they will come with their own problems. It's not a huge drawback, and understandable given how small the development team for both games is, but it does add a slightly uncanny edge to the otherwise solid experience. Overall, it's short and sweet. A full playthrough will likely only take about half an hour, but it's surprisingly dense and covers a lot of ground in that time. You get a good sense of who Clara is and an idea of some of her relationships and her life up until now. The game could have easily just picked one location to cover all of these aspects at once, but spreading them across a variety of areas not only emphasises the different narrative focus of each location, but really gives a sense of a world as well, both in terms of the places you visit and the places glimpsed outside windows or on the horizon, places you'll finally get to visit in Eastshade. Exploring Eastshade properly makes up for the focus of the next game. Clara sets off on her expedition to explore the northern waters, but she has a long life of adventuring ahead of her. We know this because years later she'll be returning on the same ship that brings the painter to Eastshade for the first time. Clara's actually the first character you meet in Eastshade, though she isn't named directly. You fetch a book for her as a way for the game to teach you basic interaction just before your boat runs aground and sinks. Everyone survives, luckily, though it's the last time you'll hear of Clara, aside from a biography of her life hidden away on her uncle's farm, now being run by her cousin. You, however, wind up on the beach near Lyndow, rescued by a local hermit with nothing but the clothes on your back and your trusty painter's easel. Lyndow's had a real glow-up since the last game. The layout is the same, but the buildings are all finished now, rounded buildings that feel both simple and organic while still feeling grand and ornate. It's an impressive balance to pull off, and is helped by the improved level of detail since the previous game. The design work throughout the game is fantastic, and the natural feel of the buildings meshes well with the anthropomorphic animal people. These animal people are one of the larger problems with the game, which is saying something when such a minor problem is also one of its largest. They're a great improvement over leaving Lyndow's models. In the years since Clara left, the citizens have stopped covering their faces too, so now they all have full lip syncing to go with the fully voiced character performances. I've never been a biggest fan of anthropomorphic animals, so they were a little off-putting at first, but you quickly get used to them so they don't drag the game down. Except the monkeys. The monkeys fit closest to leaving Lyndow's NPCs, but they still look just human enough to be unsettling, while the other species are disconnected enough from reality to feel stylized without feeling odd. When you are helping an owl person drum up business for her hot air balloon, that feels natural and immersive, it's just part of the world, but whenever you're interacting with the monkey people, suddenly you're thrust into the uncanny valley, the illusion shatters and it all starts feeling a little silly, like the game suddenly became Bob Ross's Adventures on the Planet of the Apes while you weren't paying attention. Bob Rossing it around Eastshade makes up the majority of the game. As a painter, you travel to Eastshade at the behest of your probably late mother. She wanted you to go to Eastshade, a land she visited in her youth, to find inspiration. She gives you 4 locations she thinks you should paint from, and reaching and painting these locations constitutes the game's primary quest. But most of these locations require more work to reach than just shaking off the seawater and wandering over to them. While the game is fully open and the locations can theoretically be visited in any order, in practice most areas of the game are locked behind some kind of requirement. This can be money to pay a toll, gathering the right equipment, or completing quests. Doing so gradually opens up the world bit by bit, always revealing new places to explore. Exploration plays a major part of the game and is well rewarded with new vistas. I always appreciate games that give you a task to complete somewhere out in the world, but don't give you full guidance on how to find them. As here, it leads to wandering across the world, sometimes finding what you're looking for, other times finding new surprises. Some of the paths to major painting locations can be particularly circuitous. For example, to reach the top of the tower in central Narva, you need to help a local researcher acquire samples from 5 hot springs. These hot springs are spread across Eastshade, and only a few of them are obviously signposted. Most of them are just out in the world somewhere, though often near other quest locations. This drives the player to fully indulge in exploration. You can rush the main quest quite quickly if you know where to go and which steps are mandatory, but Eastshade recognises that it's the journey that's most important, and the journey here is best when you can take the time to wander, take in the sights, and help the people you find along the way. For the most part, the questing in Eastshade is thoroughly engaging. Despite the lack of violence, there are still people who need help. Quests are wildly varied. There's your basic painting requests, of course, as well as a slew of fetch quests, but also far more complex endeavours, such as investigating a theft from the inn on the lake, or helping the excavation crew on the haunted glacier. Despite the fairy tale setting, the quests come with some level of moral complexity, and there's a maturity to the subject material that elevates some otherwise simplistic quest design. The game treats Eastshade as a real place with real problems, such as the question of the ruins on Tiffmore Bluff. Natives want them left alone as they're sacred, the university wants to investigate them, meanwhile prospective merchants want to turn them into a tourist attraction. Your actions can influence these proceedings somewhat, and there are some quests that have multiple possible endings, though your role is limited to helping people out, and you aren't going to be having a world-altering influence on Eastshade. For the most part, the more realistic subject material of quests works well, though there is one exception. There's one particular quest line early on that starts with you wandering into someone's house to find they've got their head stuck in a pot. Depending on your choices, this quest can end with a single father having his son taken away by the authorities on seemingly false charges of domestic abuse. It is a wildly heavy turn, and there's nothing else quite as extreme through the rest of the game. It also comes really early in the game, which can leave a really bad first impression. The first time I played Eastshade, I actually bounced off it after this questline due to the bad taste the whole thing left. I get the intent behind the questline. This line only happens if you engage in gossiping with the townsfolk. If you refuse to indulge in gossip, you help the man out and move on with no ill effect. It's only if you start poking your nose in that things go so wildly off of the rails. The dangers of idle gossip is a fine subject for a quest, and it would fit well with the rest of the game, but it really needed to have lower stakes in this instance. Child abuse is obviously a hugely sensitive topic, and suspicions of child abuse need to be taken seriously. In the real world, unfortunately, signs of child abuse are often overlooked. I know in the UK, at least every couple of years, you get a news story of social services failing to act on signs of child abuse leading to a death. So presenting the authorities as overzealous and likely to overstep if concerns are raised, falsely removing children without proper investigation, and showing raising concerns for children having such negative effects is actually kind of a reckless story beat. That said, I don't want to be too harsh. Including sensitive subject material appropriately is difficult, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try at times. This particular questline was poorly executed, but the vast majority of quests in the game fare much better, and while it's worth examining the failings of this one, it's not a blot on the game as a whole, or the developer. I firmly believe the developer's intended message behind the quest was don't gossip. That it kind of delivers the message don't report concerns of child abuse is almost definitely an unintended accident, and I think jumping to the conclusion that this was intentional would be just as much a mistake. Any creative endeavour is difficult, and not everything pans out how we originally plan. Not everything is received in the spirit we might intend. While this quest can lead to the game having a bad first impression, it's not enough to tarnish the game overall, since the rest of the work is of such high quality. It's worth reiterating what a small team developed Eastshade. It started as a solo project, but excluding a large number of voice actors, the total people working on Eastshade never reached double digits. The game may not be huge by open world standards, but for the size of the team, the game size is truly impressive. Far larger teams have struggled to make works of comparative size and quality. Wandering the lands of Eastshade really sells the sense of it being a believable place, and it's a joy to take in the sights and help its inhabitants, whether that involves your art or not. Painting in Eastshade requires two resources. The first is canvases. These can be bought later in the game, but early on they're made with a crafting system that is otherwise used to build some of the equipment used to reach new areas. The other requirement is inspiration. With both of these you can paint from anywhere you want, compose your image, set your aspect ratio, and paint. The way paintings resolve themselves in stages on your canvas is beautiful and never gets old. The paintings themselves are effectively just a painterly filter over a screenshot, but they are still a reasonable facsimile and evoke the feeling of oil paintings nicely. When painting for a quest or commissions, you'll be tasked with including specific elements, often at specific times of day. Of course, quantifying the actual quality of the composition is very difficult from a mechanical and arguably artistic perspective, so simply including the correct elements is enough to complete the request, leaving the exact level of engagement, how much time you spend perfectly finding the right vantage point to compose the painting, up to the individual player. Effectively, it's just gamifying the use of a photo mode, but I've always been a big fan of photo modes in games. Eastshade will even let you export the paintings currently in your inventory, though the resolution can leave something to be desired, unfortunately. In a lot of games that feature photo modes, I find it enjoyable to deliberately play with the intention of wandering the world taking screenshots, but during normal gameplay it's easy to be too distracted by gameplay loops to remember to stop and take pictures. Eastshade, putting the picture taking front and centre, leads to a much deeper level of interaction with the visuals of the world, since that's always front and centre in your mind, though the inspiration mechanic does stop you from taking as many pictures as you might like. The inspiration mechanic is one that I thought would be annoying at first. If you run out of inspiration points, you can't paint anything. It's frustrating to discover something you want to paint or come across a quest that requires a certain picture to finish, only to realise you're out of inspiration and can't. But as anyone who makes things for a living or as a hobby will tell you, sometimes that's just how it is. Creativity isn't an infinite well. We'd all love to be able to make and never stop, but eventually the ideas stop coming, and the making becomes nigh impossible. Creative blocks are a real and frustrating part of life, and can be very hard to overcome. In Eastshade, the way you gain inspiration is by travelling, seeing new things, reading books, helping people with quests, and this is often the way of things in real life as well. If you spend too much time creating and not enough time living, it becomes difficult to continue working. You need to take a break to do other things to recuperate. Travelling, socialising, spending time absorbing others' work. In Eastshade, you can also drain your creative energy by performing menial labour, which is definitely a mood, and you can gain it back by taking hallucinogenic drugs, which is a concept we aren't going to examine too closely for legal reasons. The game's attempt to take a concept as broad and complex as creativity and systematise it is ambitious, so it's genuinely impressive that the result actually mirrors the lived experience of engaging in creative acts so well. That said, during regular gameplay, it's reasonably generous with inspiration points, so it's rare to find yourself completely empty unless you're actively making lots of paintings for yourself. Of course, thanks to the gorgeous world design, it's very easy to find reasons to paint for its own sake. Eastshade is a lush and green land, full of interesting locations to explore. Forests, lakes and rivers of different kinds fill the centre and south edge of the map, all of which are beautiful in their own way while still feeling distinct from one another. To the north sits vast mountains, only accessible by air, and ice flows that require specialist equipment to explore. Meanwhile in the east sits the capital city of Narva. The central tower of Narva features the same rounded architecture of Lyndow, but at a grand scale. The spires and domes of Narva make for a striking silhouette from a distance. But my favourite area has to be Tifmore Bluff, to the west. The bluff is a large area of rolling hills, allowing for long sightlines. It's spotted with windmills, ruins and rocks, but the distance from any settlements and the windswept cliffs make the place feel abandoned, giving the area a great wilderness atmosphere, unlike any other place in the game. All of these areas are beautifully lit at all times. In photography, there's a concept known as the golden hour, the time of day briefly after sunrise and before sunset. During these times, the light is not only angled more, allowing for more dramatic shadows, but atmospheric effects result in far warmer light, making photos taken during this time look amazing. Eastshade has a clever trick where most of the day-night cycle takes place in this time span. Partly this is due to the sun constantly being at a low angle and deliberately warm in colour, but this is also due to the eclipse. At midday, instead of reaching the top of the sky, Eastshade's sun disappears behind its great moon, bathing the countryside in soft red light and eliminating most shadows. At least I say it's a moon. I could swear during the night while it's illuminated you can make out land masses and oceans. Either way, it leads to a situation where all your lighting conditions are either late afternoon, early morning, or the strange lighting of the eclipse, quite unlike anything in the real world. The world is always bathed in interesting lighting conditions, further enhancing the ability to easily create beautiful images. In a very nice touch, the paintings delivered as part of quests, or even as some of the commissions you can take later in the game, will often be hung in the world, and it's always a pleasant surprise to come across some of your work hanging in someone's home. It helps to cement the feeling that you are impacting the world in some small way. This is further enhanced by the epilogue. When you finish the 4 paintings you promised your mother, and any number of side quests and aimless wandering you're satisfied with, you can leave Eastshade via a ship from Lyndow, and find yourself back in the studio your character calls home. But it's filled with small mementos from your travels, along with letters from various people you met and helped throughout your time in Eastshade. It's similar to the ending slides you get in RPGs like Fallout, though less elaborate. Nonetheless, open-world games can often have the problem where they just peter out towards the end as content dries up. This explicit conclusion, with a quiet moment to look back on all you achieved in Eastshade, averts that problem and creates a truly satisfying ending. These days, people keen to engage in non-violent games are far better served than they once were. The abundance of cozy games make it easy to find something to occupy your time, but often such games lead to repetitive, long gameplay loops, making incremental progress over a great deal of time. Eastshade is unusual for its attempt to introduce non-violent methods of interacting with traditionally action-focused open-world games, without losing the narrative and exploratory focuses that make the game so engaging in the first place. That it does so with such good execution while maintaining a level of maturity with regards to its storytelling is laudable. Lead developer Danny Weinbaum has stated that he wanted Eastshade to be not so much a game, but rather a place you visit. Between Eastshade and leaving Lyndow, he has succeeded. Eastshade is a place more than worth visiting. Thanks for watching.